Yes, let me just start the PowerPoint slide, then I'll
Okay.
let you know what the what it's about. So yes, in this particular lecture, I'll be talking about, as you can see in the title already, about the monetization of characters in Gacha and Otome games. I'm gonna talk about like how characters in these particular games, particularly on free-to-play games like Gacha and particular free-to-play Otome games, are being monetized so that.
One second, Jolene, I'm sorry, one moment. So everyone watching, you might need to unwatch the screen and then start rewatching the screen to see it because Discord is being Discord today. So
Okay.
worst case scenario, um, um, stop watching the screen, come back in, and then you can see everything perfectly. And then we should be able to start this. I did the same thing and I can see everything fine, hear everything fine now. Okay.
So I need to go in and out of the panel.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Everybody
Okay.
else, if you can't see what Jolene is
Yeah.
sharing, that's how you fix it.
Okay.
You should be good to start now. Sorry about that.
Okay. No, 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 no problem. All right. So monetization of characters in Gacha and Otome games. I will start with a brief introduction of myself and why I'm the one who's giving this particular lecture. So my name is Dr. Joleen Blom. You can call me Joleen in English, and I'm currently a university lecturer at the Tampere Game Research Lab and at the Center of Excellence in Game Culture Studies at Tampere University, which is in Finland. It is currently 8 p.m. in the evening right now. After this lecture, I'll continue with my night. But in terms of what I do for a living, I work as a game scholar there at the university and as a Japanologist. And the topics of research that I research are, for example, Japanese video games is usually what I'm known for. East Asian games in extension of that. Um, I also look at like transmedia entertainment franchises, and I particularly like to look at like game characters. And nowadays also like these parasocial relationships, these one-sided relationships that we seem to establish with characters, particularly in romantic games. And then I look at how they're being commercialized and monetized within these games and the franchises to which they belong. I also wrote a book on video game characters and transmedia storytelling that you can see on the screen. I'm not trying to sell it to you because it's for free online. You can find a PDF at the Amsterdam University Press just by Googling it. So no need to, I get no money for it, basically. Um, so as a game scholar, I do research in a field known as game studies, which is about study of games and play and related phenomena. So I look at games the whole day, I suppose. But I'm also trained as a Japanologist, and I research Japanese culture and language. As a result, you get this a combination of someone who, well, looks at Japanese video games and these related phenomena. That's basically what I do. A few months back, from running from May to November, I curated this exhibition on Japanese romance games in Finland. So if you were here in Tampere at the time at the Finnish Museum of Games, because we do have a connection with a museum of games that was running there. Unfortunately, it's not running anymore. But if you have any questions or want some information about that, I'm happy to give it to you later. As for this lecture, um, basically, I've divided this lecture into three parts. I will first talk about the gamification of digital games, particularly about gacha games. Then I will go to the topic of mediated intimacy, and I will particularly talk about otome games. And these two are connected, and I will show how they're connected, or rather crystallized, in a case study on love and deep space, which you might know. My work is rather theoretical. Um, but I'll try to make it as accessible and as understandable as possible. If you have any questions after the lecture, feel free to just ask me if you need any clarification or anything, or just want to discuss it further. The lecture itself will take about 30 minutes to 40 minutes. Yes, and then there's a time for questions if you like. Let's go to the first part. On the gamification of digital games, basically when we're talking about this concept of gamification of digital games, we're talking about a growing trend where almost anyone now plays games and can gamble from any time at any location. And this is basically afforded by the technological changes that we have seen over the past 1 or 2 decades. And among others, one of the main reasons why we now can like gamble and play games everywhere is due to the rise of the smartphone and its platform and its applications that is known as platformization. Now, in practice, when we talk about like this particular concept of gamification of digital games, we're talking about gambling, gaming, and the consumption of that being intertwined. That is stronger than what we saw decade ago or 2 decades ago, and particular practices that are an example of that would be betting on esports or certain monetizations of live streams on Twitch, or betting on character skins in games, battle passes, casino apps, but also loot boxes in games and gacha games. So gacha games then are a form of this gamification of digital games, and they are defined through their monetization mechanic, which is known as gacha. Gacha is derived from the gachapon, which is a vending machine that you can see here on the right, the picture on the right. And it's a vending machine from Japan where consumers can basically pay by like paying a certain amount of yen. In this case, of this particular gachapon, 400 yen, which I think is currently like about $2. And so you pay that coin in order to pull a randomized item from a certain set of items. And usually that item is a character of a franchise. There's a few exceptions to that as well, like the lemur here. In gacha games, the digital versions of these, gacha translates to a random reward mechanic where players try to pull a character for their gameplay. But there is an artificial scarcity there. You don't really know which character you get. So in a gachapon, the material thing, there's a material scarcity. But in a digital game, there's an artificial scarcity. There is actually the scarcity is decided by the developers. Now, usually in these games, you pay for this mechanic either with in-game resources or you pay with real money, but then only for the chance of getting this character. And so there's a predetermined set of characters, and you always get something. So that is then why it's not really considered actual gambling, but gamified. But you might not get the character that you want at all. If you've played a gacha game, you know this. Then gacha games are also identified by the region where they're from. So they're associated with East Asia, or the East Asian region, specifically game industries from China, South Korea, and Japan. Although research has shown that gacha games are not exclusive to East Asia. Loot boxes, on the other hand, are more associated with North American and European game industries. But examples of gacha games, I've just put a few up on the slide here, are, for example, Fire Emblem Heroes, or Animal Crossing Pocket Camp, or Dragon Ball Legends, which are from Japan. But there's Genshin Impact, Zenless Zone Zero, and Infinity Nikki that are from China. And then there's Summoner War, for example, from South Korea. If we look at the statistics, gacha sometimes appears as a subcategory under the feature of character collection, where players then in this kind of feature need to gather sets of characters in order to play the game. And if you look at this particular statistic from 2022, it said that character collection was the most widespread feature of the top mobile games worldwide in 2022. And we also see that the top games that have character collection as a feature are games from East Asia. So we're talking here about Honor of Kings, Players Unknown Battleground, Genshin Impact, Pokemon Go, Midsummer Happy Derby, Fate Stay Night. So you can really see that it's East Asia that is dominant here. And that kind of makes sense because popular culture in East Asia is so character oriented, and it has a lot of gacha already within these franchises that they have, or these random rewards mechanics. So an entertainment franchise in Japan is usually called a media mix. There's usually an anime or a manga at the center of it, and then character images, they proliferate other products and goods. And this media mix idea has influenced Chinese and South Korean franchises as well, although they're usually called something else there. But I admit I'm not entirely familiar with how they're called in China and in South Korea. That is not my area of expertise. But characters are then also often found in gacha, um, in randomized in monetization formats, even when it's not digital games. So think about the gachapon that I just showed you, but also trading cards like the Pokemon trading cards, Yu-Gi-Oh trading cards, or as randomized collectibles. They also appear as coasters in, for example, themed cafes or stores. There's a photo by a friend of mine on the left when she went to a particular themed cafe. And we also see it in games that are not necessarily gacha games, but there's some randomized mechanic that clearly resembles gachapon. Think of, for example, Animal Crossing or The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. I actually have a little clip of that from my gameplay. Gacha as a feature, as a mechanic, has become quite normalized in a lot of franchises and particularly in games. This is then the second part of the lecture, mediated intimacy, because at the same time, parallel to the gamification of digital games, we also see a rise in this idea of mediated intimacy. So a rise in media that caters to people's emotions and feelings. And one way through which this happens is through media that want people to create these parasocial relationships with media figures. These are one-sided, platonic or romantic, doesn't really matter, relationships from users to figures like actors, television hosts, but also fictional characters are very much on the rise. And games, especially romance games, are good at inviting players to create such parasocial relationships. So this is then my bridge kind of to Otome games, these romance games from East Asia with Japan as the origin, where female players are the target audience. And in these games, they're invited to create these romantic parasocial relationships with usually straight male characters. But there's also the boys' love genre. I will not talk about the boys' love genre in this particular lecture, but I saw that in the schedule there will be some boys' love lectures as well. Now, in terms of where does Otome come from, or Otome games come from, Otome arose from shoujo as a genre, and shoujo, the word itself, means girl in Japanese, but the term has a particular association with its meaning. The idea of a shoujo is a pre-war concept that refers to the time of the Meiji period, so 1886 until 1912. And that was a time for women where they started to delay their marriages in favor of education. So the idea of shoujo has much to do with modernity. And shoujo manga It's a genre of fictional works and related products that arose after the Second World War, when the prolonged phase between childhood and marriage for girls became its own social category. And shoujo manga then is girl-oriented fiction that first arose as magazines, then it became manga, and then it turned to anime. I'm skipping a couple of decades here from, post-war until the 1990s. But in the 1990s, shoujo became more or less what we how we know it today. So it became a genre of role-playing and escapism. There's an indulgence in fantasy and in non-reproductive sexuality, basically. It's not really confined anymore to magazines or manga serials or anime episodes, but it grew into this into a media mix that contains all kinds of products. Yes, manga, anime, magazines for sure, but also games, phone apps, clothing, decorations, makeup, and all kinds of other merchandise with characters as the basis of that. It was all about the character, and it still is. Otome then, and Otome games arose from this shoujo-focused mediascape. The game Angelique is usually considered to be the first Otome game and was created by the all-female developer Ruby Party, and it was published in 1994 for the Nintendo Super Famicom system. So you can see some pictures of Angelique here on the right. Players in this game play as a princess that has the quest of becoming the new queen of the universe. And for this, she needs to enlist the help of 9 beautiful male guardians, which are the love interests. And in contrast to shoujo, Otome was a bit more old-fashioned. Shoujo was associated with freedom and even a tad of rebellion, but Otome means maiden, and the concept is imbued with this traditional ideals of femininity and virginity of an unmarried, innocent girl. Now, when we look at what are Otome games actually, or what are these traditional format of Otome games, they're usually what you can consider feminine games, in the sense that they're usually targeted towards women, and they have gameplay that is very popular for among women. And so this is basically what I've written here is basically what a traditional Otome game looks like in terms of gameplay. There's usually a female player character that forms a relationship with, most of the time, a straight male character. The games imitate story plots and art from other media, so in this case particularly anime and manga, and then in particular from the shoujo genre. There are usually story routes that have good endings and bad endings depending on the choices that the player makes. The games are very much text-based with pictures. They're simple gameplay to forward the story. And then they are part of this multimedia scape media mix. They're usually part of a bigger franchise. Otome games have become very popular worldwide, also in the past decades, with many companies from the East Asian region now localizing their games in English to either the mobile phone or the Nintendo Switch as the main platform. Before like a few years ago, Otome games were actually not all that popular, and they were not translated so fast, if at all. But nowadays we can even see that certain Otome games are translated as they are being created, especially when they are for the phone and when they are free to play. So this is then the connection to the gamification of digital games. In the past 2 decades, the way that digital games are monetized shifted from what we call premium to freemium. Freemium being free to play. So again, that's the gamification that I talked about, and this has been a global shift. So when games used to be mostly monetized in a premium format, we'd buy first a physical or a digital standalone product in a one-time sale. So you would just go to the store and you buy the game and you got the entire game. But that gradually shifted with the rise of smartphones. And now we have this free-to-play model being the dominant model in the global game industry. And so the game then itself is free to play, but it contains these in-game purchases. And this monetization shift first occurred in the East Asian game markets and only later in the Euro-American game markets. And this happened mostly due to the large national success of South Korean free-to-play games, which then influenced Japan, then went to China, North America, and Europe, more or less in that order. And the shift in this market also influenced Otome games. Otome games are really not like this kind of outsider type of game or exceptional game that wasn't influenced. They also gradually became free to play when they started to appear more on the smartphone. Now, in the period of 2011 2013, players would initially pay for character roots. So they would download the game on their phone, the app, and then they would pay for one character route. So you'd select a certain character, pay for it, and then you could follow that character's story. This differs from the traditional Otome game that I just mentioned, where players would pay for the entire game, and then they would be able to play all the character routes. Yes, there would be like moments where you would have to unlock a character route. That is quite common in traditional Otome games, but you had already paid for all the content, not just one character route, as was the case in 2011 2013. And the complete free-to-play model as we know it now emerged after or around 2013, and these games were built around encouraging microtransactions through limited stories per day. So if you wanted to read a story, or you wanted to read the main story, you had a couple of chapters, and you could only read a few chapters a day because it was capped with chapter tickets. And of course, you can pay for more chapter tickets, but if you wanted to do it free to play, the progress or the progression of the story would be very slow. Usually these games also have mini games, like dress up mini games. There would be temporary events, like temporary mini games or temporary stories that you would only be able to play or read within a certain amount of time, like around 2 weeks usually, maybe a month if you're lucky. And then there was, of course, the character gacha, that if you wanted to have a certain character or you wanted to have like certain clothing of the character, you would have to go through this gacha system. But most of all, one of the main important things that one of the scholars that have been researching these games, in this case Sarah Christina Ganson, mentions is that most Otome games contain steamy, intimate content, right? But in free-to-play games, this steamy content became premium. You would have to pay for it. So even if the game itself was free to play and you could like go through the entire main storyline, if you wanted to see this steamy content, you would have to pay for it. And they knew what their players would pay for, basically. So, right? Why would you pay for it, right? Because that is a question that I often get, and I'm not a psychologist. I cannot explain you the workings of the human brain. I can explain the media side of it. And the thing with this is that these games, they are character focused. They rely on players' feelings about certain characters. Games, like any other media, films, books, television series, they are good at inviting affective and intimate emotions towards their content. And so Otome games, which derive on the representations of romance and feelings towards the character, they're very good at inviting players to then pay for these experiences. And this fits within the overall Japanese media mix, the franchises, where consumption of the franchise is driven by interest or at least, or sometimes even a desire for these fictional characters. And that really isn't something new. I'm really not saying something groundbreaking here, because it's something that has been ongoing for over 50 years already, with the emergence of media mixes through manga and anime after the Second World War. But like I said, Otome games have become very international. They're not only produced and created in Japan, nor only consumed over there. So here again, I have another statistic. There is basically there is a regional market construction between China, South Korea, and Japan that borrow content and influence each other in terms of media entertainment content. A lot of media entertainment content that we see from this region is character focused. And it is currently China actually that has the biggest game market, but not only the biggest game market, it also has started to grow in terms of international gacha games. So China is huge back in China in terms of the game industry. It has the biggest one, the biggest national game industry. But now its gacha games are also have become very popular internationally, including the Otome games. Um, so what you can see from this statistic here is that the Chinese game Love and Deep Space is really thriving in Japan. So the statistics show that Love and Deep Space managed to get into the top 5 top revenue games within 6 months in Japan. All the other games that you see on this slide on the right, Ensemble Stars Music, Disney Twisted Wonderland, they have been around already for a couple of years, so it's quite natural that their revenue is rather large. But Love and Deep Space was released in January this year, and when they measured the revenue for this particular statistics, it had only been there for 6 months. So that kind of revenue growth is enormous. And it's a free-to-play game. Another statistic that I pulled when we again look at Love and Deep Space, we see that the game has created a surge of global revenue for interactive stories. Otome games are usually not being put as like the Otome genre in global statistics. They're usually called something along the lines of interactive stories, or here we also see lifestyle. Whatever, but it's definitely Otome games and definitely Love and Deep Space that shows has become global and globally very popular. So that game I think it's pretty illustrative of the growing global popularity of mobile Otome games. But I also think it's important to look at this game not only because it's popular and because it brings in a lot of money, but it shows another shift in monetization. Now, just repeating myself here for a little bit, Love and Deep Space is a game published by the Chinese company Paper Games in January 2024. And it basically crystallizes the two trends that I've been talking about, amplification of digital games and the rise of mediated intimacy in a single game. Now, the game itself has a main story. This main story is about a female hunter, that's the player, who hunts wanderers, which are monsters that started to appear after a certain catastrophe. And the story is set in a futuristic Asian city called Lincoln City in 2048. And there are 4 love interests up to this point. The game calls them companions, by the way, that this protagonist meets along the way of her adventures. This is a very general synopsis. Now, the target audience for this game, I would say, is I think women in their 20s who have the time and the money to spend on this game. The way that this game is monetized is similar to the other mobile Otome games that I just showed you, but it differs very much in one aspect. The previous models either had you pay for a character route, or it capped the chapters with chapter tickets, for the main story, so that you would progress only very, very slowly through the game, and then the Steamy content would be premium content. You would have to pay for that. But this game's main story is completely free to play. It is not really capped in that sense. Yes, there are fighting scenes or gameplay actually that you need to do in order to continue the main story, but they're actually fairly easy. The levels are very low, so it's really easy to go through the main gameplay for free at least, or the main storyline. However, the entire romance with these companions and their background stories is completely locked behind the gacha monetization model. So if you only follow the main storyline, there is no romance there, despite it being an Otome game. So it doesn't show any relationship between the female protagonist and the male companion characters in the free main story. So players have to go look for it in the gacha mechanic and in the limited events that this game offers. And in this game, as gacha does, it translates to a mechanic where players try to pull character memory cards. That is quite common in East Asian games, that you pull character cards, because the cards usually mean that you can use them for fighting gameplay. And that's also what you do in this game. You use them in battle mini games. But more importantly, they depict the relationships between the male companion characters and the female protagonist. They actually depict the fact that there is, or the idea that there's a relationship at all between the female character and one of the companion characters. So that really, yeah, there's like two different types of games going on, or stories going on in this game. And of course, the way that they do it with these character memory cards is that they have star levels. The higher the star level of the card, the more elaborate and the more intimate the romance scenes that these cards have to offer get. So one card is one romance scene. And the rarest cards are the 5-star character cards. So you have 3-star character cards, 4-star character cards, and 5-star character cards. But 5-star character cards, they're the rarest. They give you these very detailed, beautiful, interactive scenes, and some of them are intimate and suggestive. Steamy, as one might say, of course. And then, of course, players have to spend massive amounts of resources in order to obtain these cards, and they get these resources through mini games. They have to often grind these mini games a lot, so these are repetitive actions in a game, so that they get enough of them in order to obtain the chance of getting a 5-star character card. I think I was told by a friend that you needed to have at least 15,000 jewels or diamonds in order to get the 5-star character card that you go for in the gacha system guaranteed. I've never managed to do that, to be honest. So players have to either spend a lot of time grinding, or they can also pay for the resources for these diamonds just for the chance of getting a character card. So while the gacha mechanic always guarantees a 5-star character card after, I think, 65 pulls, you might not get the 5-star character card that they're advertising at that time. So you always get a card, but there's never a guarantee that you'll actually get the cards that you want. It is, in this sense, gambling-like. In addition, on top of that, a lot of the romance is event-based. So events are a very common tactic from Japan for Otome games and its related merchandise. Physical Otome merchandise, like figurines or keychains, are often distributed and sold in limited quantities. They're small and they're collectible. And so they often come in forms of limited editions that are only available for a limited amount of time. But at least there's a more material scarcity there. In gacha games, the games tend to run events that offer limited edition resources or characters. It creates an artificial scarcity. There's not actually a material that stops you. It's just the algorithm of the game. But despite this, in most of the Otome games that I have seen on the phone, free-to-play Otome games, the romance is still there in the main storyline. But like I said, in Love and Deep Space, the romance is only available in the memory cards through the gacha, through through the limited events. So these limited events only solidify the artificial scarcity of this romantic relationship that the game portrays. It gives this idea of FOMO, fear of missing out. If you don't get the card now, you'll never get it. So there's an example. There was this recent event. These events go so fast that by the time I tell you about this event, it's already done. This event called Yes Cat Caretaker. It ran from November 12th until November 30, and like most events in this game, it has a story, it has some gameplay, and it has a gacha mechanic. And the storyline of the event, which all players can play, has a story that basically tells you or starts with the companion character having turned into some sort of cat hybrid. They're being cursed. But the players aren't really told why the characters are cursed. If you go through each individual storyline, which is capped, and you play the mini games, it will take you several days because there are 4 characters. You can basically play 1 chapter per character. There are character routes, basically, like in the traditional format, and then it's capped per day. But in order to get a chapter ticket to play the chapters, you need to play the mini game to unlock the chapter, basically. Now, and only if you play the mini game well enough. So you actually need to have some skill. The cat mini game is the one that I'm talking about in the middle. It's the gameplay is fairly simple, but it's not that easy. You need to be quite quick in order to like serve food to the cat. This takes at least 6 days. It was a 17-day event, so that wasn't too problematic. But this cat minigame does require more skill than some players might have. That said, if players want to know the story behind, like why did these companion characters get cursed, they need to obtain the event-based gacha cards of these characters that are advertised during that event. So the event also shows then in the advertisement of these cards in the game that there's some suggestive intimate content. So that makes the card even more desirable. But since these are 5-star character cards, they're artificially rare. I played this game. I mean, these are screenshots of my game. And when I played this event, I managed to get 2 cards only paying for a 30-day battle pass. So I did pay €6, so about $6 as well. But it was impossible for me to get all 4 character cards of this particular event. The game does allow a 100% guarantee on a selective card in the second round. So after you've got the first character card, it will then tell you, look, did you get the card that you wanted or not? But if you continue, you can do this precise wish. You can see the screenshot on all the way on the right. And then you can choose which character card you will want to get, and we assure you, you will get it. But you need to, again, do 65 or 70 pulls in order to get a guaranteed 5-star character card, that being this card. So that's an extra incentive for you to pay. Or in my case, it was an extra incentive to spend more time on this game. So it's rather hard to get all 4 character cards without paying. And if you don't, then since the event is only available for a limited amount of time, you won't get another chance to get the cards. Again, it's that FOMO feeling, right? The fear of missing out. I don't really have so many problems with that feeling. But there are many players who do, and many players who play this game, they're constantly wondering, okay, if I don't get, how will I ever get it after that? Will this event get a rerun, or will it just be over? Now, the fact that this kind of content, this kind of romantic content, is kept behind a gamblified paywall is it's manipulative. So it uses players' feelings towards these characters, and it never really guarantees the content that they pay for. They do get stuff. That is why it is legally allowed. But again, not necessarily what you want. But this is purely for more revenue to incentivize players to pay more, rather than that like it basically incentivizes players to pay more so that they can actually experience the romantic content that an Otome game is supposed to deliver. And this strategy, this monetization strategy, is really quite effective. If you just like go to the Reddit, go to the subreddit of Love and Deep Space, you will see that players confess that they have spent thousands of dollars within just a few months on this game. So that brings us actually to the last slide. I often I'm very critical of these kind of games in my lectures about these games, but I also like to emphasize that I don't really want to end on a low note, because while I'm very critical, what I also want to say is that with this rise of popularity of Otome games, which didn't used to be like that before, we see that games that are geared towards women, or like more like feminine games, are now taken much more serious in global game cultures and in the studies of games. So in the field of game studies, for example, there is this history of women and feminine games as often being ignored or downplayed as like nothing interesting. And women are often told that they shouldn't play games. You should do something, something productive, something that helps society. Or they're told that the games that they do play, that like an Otome game, aren't real games. But with the rise of popularity in Otome games, or with the rise in popularity of Otome games, it shows that we should take feminine games like these much more serious, and we should start considering them to see a phenomenon that is only just played by a couple of players, because they develop in tangent with other games and other game cultures, which includes both the positive aspects as well as the negative aspects of it. And with that, I would like to thank you for your patience. And if you think, okay, I found this quite interesting, would like to read more about media franchises and video game characters, again, there is my book. I don't get money off of it, so feel free to download it. And if you have been wondering what are the references, the other research that I've been using to make my case here, there's a couple of references right here. Thank you so much for listening.